Sarah screamed for help as two fake officers dragged her barefoot across her own front lawn, their plastic badges flashing in the brutal sunlight. Behind them, curtains twitched and doors stayed locked, the neighborhood frozen in silent fear. Just when it seemed all hope was lost, a truck rolled around the corner, and the man stepping out wasn't there to negotiate. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Jack Miller had traded the sharp chaos of combat zones for the neat rows of Willow Ridge subdivision, a place where the worst threats seemed on the surface to be overgrown hedges or a misplaced recycling bin. After 20 years in the Marines, he'd craved simplicity. Mornings spent nursing coffee with Sarah on the front porch, afternoons tinkering in the garage, evenings where the loudest sound was the crickets under the oaks. Sarah, 38, embodied that peace. Her auburn hair often slipped from the messy bun she tied it in for school, and her warm brown eyes crinkled when she laughed at the jokes Jack still made to see her blush. She taught second grade at the local elementary school, where every child loved her for her gentle patience and the colorful stickers she handed out for even the smallest victories. Their house, modest but well-kept, sat on a quiet cul-de-sac under the ever-watchful eye of the Willow Ridge Homeowners Association. Jack didn't mind rules. Discipline had been the backbone of his life, but there was something different about the way the HOA operated. It wasn't about protecting the community, it was about control. At first, it was small things, an anonymous letter scolding them for a garden hose visible from the street, a curt warning about their American flag being an inch too large under bylaws no one seemed to have read. Jack shrugged it off, fixing each violation with a stoic patience honed over decades of dealing with real authority. Sarah, ever the optimist, baked cookies for the next board meeting, thinking maybe a show of goodwill would soften the rigidity. It didn't. Over time, the notices became more frequent, the tone more hostile. Jack caught HOA board members snapping photos of their backyard through the gaps in the fence. Sarah once found a notice taped to their door with red letters warning of escalating fines. It was a slow suffocation, a tightening of invisible hands around their simple life. Still, Jack had dismissed it. "They're just bullies hiding behind paperwork," he told himself. "They won't cross the line." He never said the thought aloud, never voiced the suspicion gnawing at the edges of his mind. Because if he did, if he acknowledged how wrong things felt, it would mean admitting that the war he thought he'd left behind had simply changed uniforms. And on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon, as the sun dipped low and long shadows stretched across the sidewalk, Jack Miller's fragile trust in the normalcy of his new life was about to be shattered. The knock came just after 2 in the afternoon, hard, rapid, and too aggressive for a neighborly visit. Sarah Miller paused mid-stir at the kitchen counter, wiping her flour-dusted hands on a towel. She glanced out the side window, heart giving a tiny, inexplicable jolt. 2 men stood on the front porch, thick-shouldered, both wearing dark blue polo shirts tucked into cargo pants, cheap metal badges clipped to their belts. The word HOA Enforcement was embroidered across their shirts in blocky white letters, but the stitching looked uneven, unofficial, like it had been slapped together in someone's garage. Something about them felt wrong, too rough, too eager. Sarah tightened the tie of her apron around her waist, steeling herself. Jack wasn't home. He had gone to check on his father across town. She told herself it was probably a mistake, some routine check. Still, her fingers hovered near the deadbolt as she unlocked it and cracked the door no more than 4 inches. "Afternoon, ma'am," the taller of the 2 barked. His skin was weathered, red around the neck, a sheen of sweat glistening under the brim of a knockoff tactical cap. "We're with the HOA. Need to conduct a property inspection. Received complaints." His partner, heavier, with a shaved head and a permanent sneer etched across his face, shifted forward, one boot crossing the threshold without permission. A dark tattoo snaked up his forearm, half covered by the tight sleeve of his shirt. Sarah instinctively pulled the door closer to her body. "I haven't received any notice about an inspection," she said, forcing her voice to stay calm, even as her palms dampened. "You'll need to come back with proper paperwork." The man with the tattoo laughed. A harsh, empty sound. "We don't need paperwork. HOA rights," he said, tapping the side of his fake badge like it was some kind of magic key. Sarah shook her head. "I'm sorry, but you need to leave." The polite veneer cracked the moment she said it. The taller man lunged, slamming his palm against the door with a sharp thud that rattled the frame. Before she could scream, they shoved the door wide open, forcing her backward. Sarah stumbled, hands raised in instinctive defense, but they didn't pause, didn't even hesitate. Large, calloused hands grabbed her arms, fingers digging into the soft flesh above her elbows. She cried out, more from shock than pain, as they dragged her across the threshold onto the porch. Her bare feet skidded uselessly against the concrete, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "We warned you, lady," the shaved-headed man growled, twisting her arm cruelly. "Now you're gonna cooperate." The hot afternoon sun bore down mercilessly, casting sharp-edged shadows across the yard. The street was empty. No joggers, no kids riding bikes, only the shuttered eyes of drawn curtains and blinds. Sarah struggled, heart hammering against her ribs, but the hands pinning her were too strong, the world too quiet. And for the first time since she and Jack had moved to Willow Ridge, Sarah realized the true danger had never been in the warnings or the fines. It was in the men who thought they could act without consequences. The sun blazed high and merciless over Willow Ridge, casting Sarah's shadow long and thin against the concrete as the two men wrestled her down the porch steps. Her sandals slipped off somewhere in the struggle, and the coarse texture of the cement scraped the tender soles of her feet. Every instinct screamed at her to fight, to pull away, but the tightness of their grips and the brutal force of their shoves left her breathless, disoriented. "Stop resisting," one barked, as if her desperate flailing made her the aggressor. His sunglasses slid down the bridge of his nose, revealing eyes that were cold and utterly unmoved. Sarah gasped for air, feeling the heat of the pavement burning through the thin fabric of her jeans at the knees where she stumbled. She twisted her wrists, but the larger man only gripped tighter, his nails digging crescent moons into her skin. Her mouth opened on a scream, but the street swallowed the sound. Nothing but the faint hum of distant lawnmowers and the chirp of unseen birds answered her. A curtain twitched in the house across the street. Someone was watching. And yet, no door opened. No voice called out. The neighborhood that once felt safe now wrapped around her like a noose. "You're being non-compliant," the shaved-headed man snapped, hauling her upright with a violent tug. "Non-compliance carries consequences." He sounded like he was reciting a script. Rehearsed intimidation layered over brute force. Sarah's mind raced, searching for options, for some way to break free, to delay them. "You're not police," she choked out, her voice ragged. "You have no right." The taller man leaned in close, the sour stench of sweat and stale tobacco making her gag. "We are the law here," he hissed. "You don't make the rules. You follow them." For a heartbeat, Sarah saw the futility of arguing with men who had long since decided they didn't need the rules they claimed to enforce. Her pulse thudded painfully in her ears, panic threatening to drown her completely. A flicker of movement behind the men caught her eye. A neighbor slipping deeper into the shadows of their front room, pulling the blinds closed with nervous fingers. They would not help her. No one would. The realization struck like a blow to the chest. She was on her own. Her hands, pinned painfully behind her back, clenched into trembling fists. Somewhere deep, in a place untouched by fear, a quiet defiance stirred. Jack had always told her, Stay calm. Look for your moment. Sarah inhaled shakily, dragging whatever strength she could from the memory of his voice. She couldn't overpower them. Not now. But she could endure. Stall. Survive. Long enough. Long enough for hope to find its way home. Sarah stumbled as they forced her toward the sidewalk, her bare feet scraping against the unforgiving concrete, the sun's heat searing her skin. She fought the urge to collapse. Weakness would only embolden them further. Her body ached from the rough handling, but her mind remained sharp, slicing through the haze of panic with one thought: find a way. The front door stood ajar, swinging lightly in the faint breeze. Inside, past the threshold she could no longer reach, just beyond the tidy entryway table where Jack kept his keys and spare change, was salvation. If she could get to it. Nestled beneath the entry table, hidden behind a row of neatly stacked mail, was a small, almost invisible button, a silent alarm Jack had installed after a break-in attempt last year. No sirens, no flashing lights. Just a discreet signal that would ping Jack's phone, alerting him instantly. It was Sarah's only chance. "Get her over to the truck," the taller man barked, tugging at her arms with increasing irritation. His grip tightened like iron shackles. "Board said we could take her if she wouldn't comply." The words barely registered, background noise against the pounding in Sarah's head. She knew she had seconds, maybe less. As the men adjusted their hold, jostling her between them, Sarah twisted, feigning a stumble. Her elbow knocked into the taller man's side, drawing a grunt of annoyance. In the brief confusion, she managed a single step backward, the porch just inches away, and thrust her leg toward the doorframe. Her toes grazed the threshold. One desperate, frantic lunge later, her right hand shot forward, fingers splaying across the entry table's smooth surface. The mail slid to the floor in a scatter of envelopes and coupons. Beneath it, her palm landed squarely on the small black button. She pressed it hard. Nothing changed outwardly. No alarms, no beeping, no flashing lights to tip the men off. But Sarah knew. Somewhere, wherever Jack was, his phone had just lit up with a silent distress call. The heavier man cursed and yanked her back roughly, unaware of what had just happened. Sarah let herself sag in his grip, swallowing the gasp that rose to her throat. Hope flickered. Small, fragile, but alive. She had called him. Now she had to hold on. Jack Miller was halfway across Willow County when his phone vibrated against the console of his truck. A nondescript ping, no louder than a text message. To anyone else, it would have meant nothing. But Jack had trained himself to react differently. The signal was their code. Emergency. Come home. Now. His hands tightened around the steering wheel, a low throb building behind his temples. Years of military conditioning snapped into place without hesitation. He didn't curse, didn't ask questions. He simply moved. Jack eased the truck onto the shoulder of the quiet county road, scanning his surroundings. Empty fields stretched on either side, heat shimmering off the asphalt in the afternoon sun. No one in sight. No witnesses. He popped the latch beneath the driver's seat, a hidden panel clicking open with a smooth metallic sound. Inside was the emergency kit he and Sarah had agreed he'd keep, just in case. A soft canvas duffel, carefully packed, meticulously maintained. Jack reached inside without hesitation. The AR-15 came out first, sleek and familiar, the matte black surface cold against his calloused palms. He checked the chamber, clean, ready, and slung it across his shoulder with practiced ease. A Glock 19 came next, holstered and clipped securely at his hip. 2 extra magazines, tucked into his jacket. Every movement was methodical, mechanical. No wasted motion, no second guessing. He closed the panel, started the engine, and merged back onto the road with deadly calm. In the passenger seat, his mind spun through possibilities. Home invasion? Burglary? But no. The alert was meant for something worse, something up close and personal. Sarah wouldn't have triggered it for anything less. The thought of her, soft, kind Sarah, facing danger alone, tightened a cold band around his chest. Jack's jaw clenched, a muscle ticking in the hollow beneath his ear. Rage simmered beneath his composure, controlled but searing. Get to her. Secure the perimeter. Neutralize the threat if necessary. Simple, brutal logic. As the truck sped down the familiar streets leading to Willow Ridge, Jack's world narrowed to a single focus. His wife. No negotiation, no hesitation. Jack Miller had spent a lifetime learning how to fight. He had hoped he'd left that world behind. But if someone had dared to bring violence to his doorstep, to lay a hand on Sarah, then they had made a mistake so colossal it would change the shape of their lives forever. And Jack Miller was coming home, fully armed. The streets of Willow Ridge blurred past Jack's windows, manicured lawns and picket fences flashing by in a smear of color. He forced himself to slow down as he neared his block, not from fear, but from calculation. Charging in recklessly would only make it harder to protect Sarah. He turned the corner quietly, letting the truck coast the last 100 feet. His gaze swept the street with a soldier's precision. And there they were. 2 men on his front lawn. The first, tall and wiry, dragging Sarah by the arm. The second, heavier, standing sentry with an ugly sneer etched across his face. Sarah's bare feet stumbled over the grass, her head bowed, her hair disheveled, arms pinned cruelly behind her back. Her body sagged with exhaustion, but even from a distance, Jack saw it. The stubborn stiffness in her spine. She wasn't broken. She was holding on. Jack's hands moved instinctively, checking the AR's sling against his chest. His Glock remained holstered for now, visible but unthreatening unless drawn. He wore no uniform, no badge, no need for explanations. The street was unnervingly quiet. Cars lined the curb. Curtains flickered at windows. Plenty of witnesses. No allies. Jack eased the truck into park, turned off the ignition, and stepped out with chilling calm. The sunlight caught on the barrel of the AR as it swung into view, slung but present, a silent, undeniable warning. The taller man noticed him first. His shoulders stiffened, eyes narrowing behind cheap mirrored sunglasses. His partner shifted his stance nervously, glancing from Jack to Sarah and back again, like a dog sensing a much larger predator. Jack said nothing. He closed the door of his truck with slow deliberation, the click of it shutting sounding unnaturally loud in the still afternoon air. His boots crunched against the sidewalk as he advanced, steady, unhurried. A force of nature wrapped in human skin. The taller man squared his shoulders, barking out words that barely registered as human. "Stay back! Official HOA business!" Jack's face didn't even flicker. He kept walking, gaze locked onto Sarah, as if the two imposters barely existed. At 20 feet, he stopped, planting his boots shoulder-width apart, relaxed, ready, waiting. The AR remained slung, not raised, not aimed. But every line of Jack's body screamed of the consequences if either man made the wrong move. The message needed no translation. Jack Miller had returned, and whoever had dared to touch his wife was about to learn a lesson they would never forget. The 2 men exchanged a glance, a flash of uncertainty breaking their bravado. The taller one shifted his weight back a fraction, instinctively retreating, but the heavier man squared up, puffing out his chest as if bulk alone could counter what was standing in front of them. Jack's eyes never wavered. The taller thug jabbed a finger toward him. "You're interfering with HOA enforcement," he barked, voice cracking around the edges. He reached for the walkie clipped to his belt, a cheap plastic thing, better suited for a children's toy than any serious operation. Jack's voice cut through the thick summer air, low even, lethal. "You've got exactly 3 seconds to take your hands off my wife," he said, each word measured like rounds chambered into a weapon. His right hand rested lightly near the AR's sling, fingers relaxed but precise. He didn't need to posture. The discipline in his stance spoke louder than any threat. The seconds stretched taut, thinner than wire. Sarah stood frozen between the two imposters, her breath coming in ragged pulls, her wrists still pinned painfully behind her. Her gaze flickered to Jack, a spark of recognition, a silent plea and a surge of hope, before snapping back to the thugs. The heavier man sneered, emboldened by the silence, and tightened his grip on Sarah's arm, twisting her elbow cruelly. Jack's eyes flickered, a barely perceptible change, but enough to send a chill through the air. "1," Jack said, voice almost a whisper. The taller man shifted uncomfortably, darting glances at the street, at the watching windows. Even if the residents wouldn't intervene, they would remember what they saw, and they would remember what was about to happen. 2. The heavier thug's bravado faltered. Sweat trickled down his shaved scalp, his grip on Sarah loosened by instinct. 3. Jack's right hand slid up, fingers brushing the AR's grip, not yet lifting, but the possibility of what would come next hung so thick between them it might as well have been thunder in the air. The silence cracked. The taller man released Sarah first, stepping back with hands half raised in surrender. The heavier one cursed under his breath, then shoved Sarah away from him roughly, sending her stumbling toward Jack. Jack caught her with one arm, pulling her protectively behind him, his gaze never leaving the two would-be enforcers. "You have 5 seconds to leave my property," Jack said, voice iron-wrapped. This time they didn't argue. They backed away, muttering curses, tripping over each other in their eagerness to retreat. Jack stood his ground, shielding Sarah with his body, weapon loose but ready, watching them disappear down the street like the cowards they were. The first battle was over, but Jack knew, deep in the marrow of his bones, that justice hadn't even begun to be served. Sarah clung to Jack's side, her body trembling with the adrenaline crash, but she remained upright, refusing to collapse. Jack wrapped his free arm tightly around her, shielding her from view, his stance still rigid, still ready, until the two men disappeared completely from the street. Only then did he ease his hold on the rifle, letting it rest lower against his chest, though he didn't unsling it. The neighborhood, which had pretended blindness just minutes before, seemed to stir awake. Windows that had been drawn tight now blinked open, cautious faces peering out. Doors cracked ajar. Whispers floated on the thick summer air. Jack ignored them all. He guided Sarah gently up the porch steps, back into the house, closing the battered front door behind them. She slumped onto the entryway bench, clutching her scraped elbows, her eyes wild with unspoken fear. Jack knelt before her, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he checked her arms for injuries. "No broken bones," he muttered, more to himself than her. "Bruising, surface abrasions." Sarah managed a small nod, her breath hitching in her throat. "I hit the silent," she whispered. "I know," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion he forced himself to suppress. "You did good, honey. You did real good." Before she could answer, the distant wail of sirens split the heavy air. Jack rose fluidly, shoulders straightening, every inch of him snapping back into readiness. Through the front window he watched as 2 black and white cruisers tore around the corner, tires screeching against the asphalt. Real police. The truck Jack had spotted earlier, an unmarked white pickup the thugs must have arrived in, still sat at the curb. The 2 imposters hadn't even bothered to flee properly. They hovered down the street, arguing heatedly, glancing back at the house like hyenas circling wounded prey. The cruisers boxed them in within seconds. Officers spilled from the cars, hands on holsters, barking commands. The taller fake tried to argue, waving his phony badge in the air, but it was over the moment the first real badge gleamed in the sunlight. Jack kept Sarah tucked safely inside while the arrests unfolded. Through the glass, he watched one of the officers rip the fake badge from the man's belt and hurl it onto the pavement in disgust. Plastic, flimsy, worthless. A neighbor, Mrs. Henderson from 2 doors down, hurried across the street, clutching a tablet. Her hands shook as she held it up to the officers. Footage. She had recorded everything. The forced entry, the assault, the struggle. Evidence. The officers spoke into their radios, called for backup. Within minutes, zip ties bound the thugs' wrists and they were shoved into the back of separate cruisers. But the most damning revelation came when one of the officers, clipboard in hand, approached Jack and Sarah's porch. "You need to hear this," he said grimly. "They're not law enforcement, not even close." Jack's jaw tightened. "Who sent them?" The officer flipped through his notes. "Your HOA board, or at least someone on it, told these two to enforce compliance however necessary. No paperwork, no legal authority, just a couple of hired bullies in knockoff uniforms." Sarah let out a shuddering breath, somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Jack only nodded once, his expression hardening like granite. They had crossed a line they could never uncross. And Jack Miller wasn't finished with them yet. The following days unfolded like a slow, brutal reckoning. Jack wasted no time. With Sarah recovering at home, bruised, shaken, but defiant, he threw himself into action with the same quiet ferocity he had once reserved for operations overseas. The HOA board might have hoped to slither into the shadows, claim ignorance, paint the attack as a misunderstanding. But Jack had no intention of letting them bury what had been done. He started with evidence. The police had gathered Sarah's statement, Mrs. Henderson's footage, and the fake badges already in custody. But Jack knew better than to rely on official channels alone. He requested, and was granted, access to the body cam footage from the officers who made the arrests. What he saw confirmed everything. The thugs openly admitting they had been told by the board to handle compliance issues aggressively, citing an email chain they thought would protect them. They had no idea Jack already had friends inside the county records office, quiet allies who despised the HOA as much as he did. Within days, Jack secured copies of internal HOA communications through public records requests. Dozens of emails, threads of board members, including President Marjorie Stetson herself, discussing Sarah by name, referring to her and Jack as troublemakers, floating the idea of more direct intervention when standard fines didn't work. There, in cold black letters, was the full betrayal. "Maybe we need to send a message. Compliance teams could make a quick visit. Just scare them a little." Jack compiled everything, the emails, the footage, the police reports, into a single blistering file. Then, methodically, he distributed it. To the police department's internal affairs division, to the local news stations with anonymous tips, to a pro bono civil rights attorney with a history of dismantling abusive HOAs. The backlash hit Willow Ridge like a thunderclap. Within 48 hours, news vans lined the street. Microphones pointed at the HOA clubhouse. Cameras captured board members ducking out of meetings, faces hidden behind folders and purses. The president resigned live on air, voice trembling as she read a hastily prepared statement filled with hollow denials. The two fake officers were charged formally. Assault and battery, unlawful detainment, impersonating law enforcement, conspiracy to commit intimidation. The civil suits began almost immediately afterward, not just from Jack and Sarah, but from other neighbors who realized they too had been targets of illegal enforcement tactics. The HOA's charter, once ironclad, crumbled under public scrutiny. Fines were frozen, elections were forced. Oversight committees were installed by court order. Jack never raised his voice once through it all. He didn't need to. The truth was louder than anything he could have shouted. Weeks later, when the dust had finally begun to settle, Jack and Sarah stood side by side on the front porch of their home, the same porch where terror had once tried to root itself. But the air felt different now. The HOA that had ruled Willow Ridge with fear and intimidation was gone, dismantled, stripped of its authority, rebuilt under a strict new charter that demanded transparency, accountability, and above all, respect for the people who actually lived there. The men who had dragged Sarah from their home sat behind bars, awaiting sentencing. The HOA president, once so smug and untouchable, had been publicly disgraced, her reputation shredded beyond repair. And Jack, for all his silent fury, had never once needed to fire a shot. Sarah leaned lightly against him, her head resting against his shoulder. Her bruises had faded into soft shadows on her skin, but Jack knew the deeper wounds would take longer to heal. He didn't rush her. Healing wasn't about time. It was about truth, and the truth was finally on their side. Down the street, children rode bicycles without fear of HOA patrols photographing their chalk drawings on the sidewalk. Families gathered on front lawns for impromptu cookouts, laughing freely, reclaiming their right to live without a boot pressed against their throats. Life had found a way to breathe again. Jack squeezed Sarah's hand gently. "You ready?" he asked. She smiled. A small, genuine thing, but strong, stronger than it had been even before the nightmare began. "Ready," she said. Together they stepped off the porch. The old mailbox, once the subject of so many absurd warnings, now gleamed in the sunlight, freshly painted and just 1 inch taller than the HOA's old regulations had allowed. A small, almost imperceptible rebellion. A reminder that dignity didn't bow, even under pressure. Neighbors waved as they passed, not out of obligation, not out of fear, but out of genuine gratitude. Word had spread. People knew who had stood up when no one else dared. Jack didn't seek recognition, neither did Sarah. But respect, the kind that can't be demanded or bought, wrapped around them like a shield now, silent and unshakable. They had fought for their home, fought for each other, and won. Not with vengeance, not with violence, with strength, with truth, and with a stubborn, immovable love that refused to be pulled into the dirt. The sun set over Willow Ridge, washing the houses in gold and fire. And for the first time in a long, long while, Jack Miller smiled, a real smile, as he led his wife forward into the life they had earned.